For my thoughts on all the latest happenings in the NFL in a completely relaxed, unscripted format, be sure to check out my channel, JG9 News. And now, on with our feature presentation. This man right here is Dan Pastorini, and for basically the entire 1970s, he was the man under center for the Houston Oilers. While by no means a spectacular quarterback, and by no means was he one of the top-tier guys in the league alongside the likes of Terry Bradshaw, Roger Staubach, Bob Greasy, and Ken Stabler, he was a solid quarterback who could win you games if he had to. The third overall pick in the 1971 NFL Draft had a decent career in pro football, making it to the Pro Bowl in 1975, guiding the Oilers to back-to-back appearances in the AFC Championship in 1978 and 1979, and having a few seasons where he finished inside the top 10 of the league in passing touchdowns. I even talked about Pastorini in a previous video of mine, when I brought up his heroic performance against the Miami Dolphins in the 1978 wildcard, where he had no business playing in the game due to his injury status, and then put together one of the best performances of his career, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. Long story short, Pastorini was a pretty solid quarterback, and was no slouch for the vast majority of his career. However, his rookie season was an absolute disaster in more ways than one. There are plenty of quarterbacks who go on to have solid and even great careers after having a disastrous rookie season, like Terry Bradshaw and Troy Aikman, and Dan Pastorini was definitely one of them. But if you want anything that highlights how bad his rookie season was, and how bad Pastorini was to start off his career, you have to look past the box score. You have to look past all the numbers, and you have to look past all of the statistics. Because the biggest disaster of his rookie season wasn't any interception he threw, or any sack that he took, or any receiver that he missed, but rather was a sandwich. Seriously, a freaking sandwich. Dan Pastorini's 1971 season could be summed up by an ordeal with a pastrami sandwich gone horribly wrong. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. Because this is the story behind Dan Pastorini, and the time he tried to make a pastrami sandwich, and it ended up costing him his job. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just how bad Dan Pastorini's season was going up until this point, and what was transpiring within the organization. And to do this, we need to start off with, well, how bad the Oilers were doing at this point. The Oilers were expected to be a bad team heading into the 1971 season, seeing as they were bad enough to get the number 3 pick in the draft the year before, with an abysmal 3-10-1 record. However, by this point in 1971, this was looking like a special kind of suck, as this was looking like the worst season in franchise history. Through the first 10 games of the season, the Oilers had nothing but pride to play for, as their season was completely 100% over. They sat dead last in the AFC Central with a 1-8-1 record. And if it wasn't for the Buffalo Bills, who were 0-10 and were absolutely inept at everything, they would be the worst team in football. Houston had scored just 129 points, or 12.9 points per game, which was the worst total in the AMC and the second worst total in the NFL, only marginally better than Philadelphia. Houston's defense allowed 243 points, or 24.3 points per game, which was the third worst total in the NFL. And when you look at their point differential of -114, only the Buffalo Bills at a staggeringly bad -174 were worse. Things were so bad that owner Bud Adams ended up firing one of the assistant coaches, completely overriding head coach Ed Hughes while doing so. This team was very, very bad, and entering week 11 of the season, they had been outscored 97-54 over their last 3 games. And up next for the Oilers in week 11? Well, that was a date against this team right here, their AFC Central rival, the Cleveland Browns. When the teams met earlier in the season, in the game that you're watching right now, everything went wrong for Houston. This week 1 game was ugly with a capital U, as the Browns ended up destroying the Oilers by a final score of 31-0. Houston picked up just 35 rushing yards on less than 2.5 yards per carry. The offensive line allowed 5 sacks. 2 quarterbacks played in the game for the Oilers, with the veteran Charlie Johnson starting the game and with rookie quarterback Lynn Dickey relieving him. Both quarterbacks were terrible, with Johnson going 9 for 19 with no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and a passer rating of 24.1, and Dickey going 8 for 20 with no touchdowns, 3 interceptions, and a passer rating of 25.8. Both Johnson and Dickey had a passer rating worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. And entering Week 11, while the Oilers had nothing to play for but pride due to their record, as they were basically mathematically eliminated from playoff contention, unless the rest of the AFC Central got hit by a meteor strike, the Browns were tied for first place with the Pittsburgh Steelers, so they had everything to play for and then some. In other words, no one was giving the Oilers much of a chance, and understandably so. However, there was one difference between the Week 1 matchup and the Week 11 matchup. That difference on paper? Well, it was supposed to be this man right here, rookie quarterback Dan Pastorini. You see, Pastorini didn't play in that Week 1 matchup under center. He served as the team's punter, but in terms of throwing the football, that never happened. Now, following a combination of anemic play from veteran Charlie Johnson and a bum knee from Johnson, the keys to the team were handed over to Pastorini, who started the team's last game against the Cincinnati Bengals and had started 5 of the team's last 6 games. Media outlets were reporting, unsurprisingly, that Pastorini was expected to get the start, and that even though head coach Ed Hughes had a very quick leash and was not afraid to pull Pastorini for the veteran Johnson or for his other rookie, Lynn Dickey, that it would be shocking if Pastorini did not start the game. I should also note that the final 3 games of the season were started by none other than Dan Pastorini. So based off all the evidence, it seemed very clear that Pastorini, in this meaningless game for the Oilers, relatively speaking, would be under center. The problem was that this rookie season for Pastorini was really, really bad, as you've probably been able to tell. There are growing pains as a rookie, and then there are the kinds of pains that Pastorini was going through. Because if Jim Plunkett was on one end of the spectrum in terms of coming into the league right away and playing exceptionally well that year, Dan Pastorini was on the opposite end. By this point in the season, Pastorini had completed just 43% of his passes and had thrown just 5 touchdowns while throwing 17 interceptions, posting a passer rating over the course of the entire season of 32.2, and he had taken 9 sacks in his last 2 games combined, just being unable to get rid of the football when it mattered most. Even in the one game that Houston won all season, a 10-6 decision against the Bengals in Week 7, it was in spite of Pastorini and not because of him, as in that game, he threw no touchdowns and 4 interceptions while posting a passer rating of 19.7. Through the first 10 weeks of the 1971 season, there were 31 quarterbacks to attempt at least 100 passes. You can see them all plotted out on this nice little chart. See that red bar all the way at the bottom? That's Dan Pastorini's passer rating at 32.8, as in 9 points lower than the second worst quarterback, who was Shaq Harris of the Buffalo Bills at 41.8. So Pastorini was struggling, and I think that's putting it lightly. However, this game against the Browns was a chance to turn things around, and at the very least, he couldn't be any worse than the men who quarterbacked the last game against them. With that, Pastorini, rookie struggles and all, was in line to start that game against the Browns. He was in practice, working with his assistant coach, King Hill, and was running some plays and throwing some footballs in the morning. Then, it was time to break for lunch before working throughout the remainder of the day with things like working out and watching film and whatnot. Pastorini lived close enough to the Oilers' facility, so it wasn't too bad of a commute for him. He could go home for lunch, fix something up, and then come back to the facility instead of eating their food. Seems innocent enough. This is something that, if you live close enough to your place of work, you've probably done before, where you go back home to eat something after working the AM shift so that you can be refreshed and get some time away from the office before the PM shift. And that's exactly what Pastorini did. he went back to his place to make a pastrami sandwich, an absolute staple of any deli, and an incredibly common type of sandwich that you probably had at one point in your life. Now, I don't know what Pastorini put on the pastrami sandwich, but whatever it did involved him having to use a knife. I don't know at what stage in the process of making the sandwich Pastorini got injured. I don't know if it was cutting the bread, or if it was trying to spread on one of the ingredients, but at some point, this became the most disastrous lunch in the NFL for one of the most disastrous teams in the NFL. Because sure enough, when Pastorini made this sandwich, he gashed his left thumb with the knife. And I don't mean that it was a small cut that stung a bit, but it's something that you could play through and fight off. I meant that this was a serious gash. Whatever Pastorini did here absolutely hurt, to the point where Pastorini wasn't spending the remainder of the day after lunch in the Oilers facility. Instead, he was spending the day in the hospital, as he almost lost a part of his finger. He saw his career flash before his very eyes, seeing as you kind of need to have your left thumb to be able to play quarterback in the league when you're gripping the football. That's kind of an important digit to have. By the start of the afternoon, the Oilers had their QB1. By the end of the afternoon, they didn't know if he was going to have all 10 fingers, all because of a sandwich. Now, there was good news and bad news from this. The good news is that this man right here, Dan Pastorini, did not need to get surgery or anything like that. Heck, he didn't even need to get stitches. Despite having to take a trip to the hospital, it turned out to be the best case scenario for something like this, all things considered. The bad news? Well, because of the injury, as you might have been able to expect, he was unable to start that game against the Cleveland Browns. Everything was kept relatively under wraps. It's not as though this incident made headlines outside of Houston, which is shocking to me. So no one knew when that game commenced that Pastorini wasn't starting, in part because he gashed his left thumb with a knife while making a pastrami sandwich, and therefore would be unable to grip the football the way he needed to. But for that game against the Browns, it was the veteran Charlie Johnson who got the call, and what would end up being his final start ever with the Oilers before finding himself on the Denver Broncos in 1972. And sure enough, the second verse was the same as the first, as once again, as you're probably able to tell from these highlights, it was the Cleveland Browns who prevailed, taking it by a final score of 37-24. Johnson's performance under center, which again was not the game plan at all before Pastorini lost to Pastrami, left a lot to be desired, as he went just 9 for 19, completing 47% of his passes for 83 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions, posting a passer rating of 20.2. You know, it felt like with this Oilers team that quarterbacks posting a rating below 39.6 was the norm and not the exception. It actually felt like an accomplishment when they were better than the literal bare minimum. Combine the 3 sacks that Johnson took in this game, and the Oilers had just 63 net passing yards with him under center. That was it. Houston turned it over 5 times, and because Johnson posed no threat as a passer, Cleveland could stack the box and destroy Houston's run game, which they did, as the Oilers had just 46 yards rushing on less than 2.5 yards per carry. It was another loss in what was a horrible season for the team that resided in the Astrodome. As for what happened to the man who was the quarterback for this team behind me right here, Dan Pastorini was able to recover from that injury after the pastrami sandwich incident, and he did start the final 3 games of the year. And the Oilers actually won all 3 of those games. They went from a 1-win team to a halfway respectable 4-win team. And Dan Pastorini played a heck of a lot better in those games after the incident versus before. Before the incident, he was completing just 43% of his passes, but in the final 3 games of the 1971 season, he was completing 56% of his passes, about in line with the league average. Before the incident, he was terrible from a passer rating perspective. His passer rating was around 32. After the incident, it was more than double that. It was 71, pretty much in line with the league average. Dan Pastorini's career might be best summed up pre-gash and post-gash. Maybe the knife actually helped him. You know, Life works in mysterious ways like that. And obviously, you can't blame Pastorini for what happened here. It's not like he got hurt doing something stupid like bouncing on a trampoline, or going jet skiing, or engaging in dangerous activity. He just made a pastrami sandwich and hurt himself using the knife. It was just one of those freak things, like getting a paper cut, or biting a nail that results in blood coming out because you bit too far. Granted, the fact that it resulted in a trip to the hospital and cost Pastorini the start is something else entirely. But what's interesting about this man's career in particular is that he finished his Oilers career as a starter with a 53-54 record, just one game under 500. If he had just one more start and got a win, he wouldn't be below 500. And he could have potentially gotten that against the Browns, if it was not for a slice of bread. Because on this day in 1971, this man right here, Dan Pastorini, lost to Dan Pastrami. Get your official Jaguar Gear 9 merchandise by going to jj9shop.com, and be sure to like and subscribe, as it really helps the channel out a lot. Join me every Wednesday night where we'll play NFL Trivia for cash prizes at 9 p.m. Eastern over on Twitch. To learn more about the history of college football, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 8. To learn more about the history of Major League Baseball, subscribe to Jaguar Gator 7. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.